time for us to huddle up with senior producer from NFL Films, Greg Cosell, also co-host of ESPN's NFL Matchup Show, and Greg Cosell's weekly segment presented by Scott Lawnyard, an official commercial site work partner of the Buffalo Bills. Well, Greg, not a whole lot of sexy, not a whole lot of sizzle to this Week 18 matchup between the Bills and the Patriots. Probably the biggest thing that will come out of the outcome of this game is who has the number one pick in the draft. If the Patriots lose, they will get it. If they win, it makes things a little more dicey for them and the Titans and a couple of other teams. But
well, I guess it's fun for draft nicks because if the Patriots lose, a quarterback won't go number one in the draft.
That's right.
That's right.
And that's a commodity that should not be dismissed here, Greg, because as you know, this Patriots roster needs a lot of help, and that's a huge bargaining chip. They could trade that for multiple picks this year and next year.
That's right. So there may be a quarterback off.
I've watched every Drake Maye snap, and I think given that the O-line is below average by NFL standards, and there's probably not a receiver on the roster who's anything more than a number 3 by NFL standards, I thought Drake Maye had a pretty good season. So there's not going to – if they stay at 1, if that's the way it plays out, they're not drafting a quarterback.
Right. And let me say this. Is Drake Maye – and we had Ben Volin on yesterday, and I made this statement, and he said, yeah, you're right. Drake Maye's the most valuable commodity in the building. I mean, he's certainly more valuable than maybe Gerard Mayo is at this point. I mean, the franchise got to make sure he stays in the building. Is it worth playing? Wouldn't you just, sit him down this weekend?
You know what? I probably would. It's funny you say that. I probably would. I think back, I've done the matchup show for years and years, going back to the 80s, and worked with Ron Jaworski forever. And Dick Vermeil used to come in, probably 2-3 times a year. And because he lives outside of Philadelphia, and he and Jaws are obviously very close because, he coached Jaws. And I remember Vermeil, and this always resonated with me. And I know you guys can appreciate this. It's probably somewhat similar in your building, even though I don't think Sean McDermott would ever say it publicly. But Dick Vermeil said, when you draft a quarterback in the top 5 in the draft, he said, everything in the building should be about making that guy a great player. He said everything, from the janitor to the coaching staff, everything. Because if that guy doesn't make it, then everybody in the building is going to lose their job at some point. Right. And, I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah. And we heard Gerard Mayo in the press conference this week, and even Alex Van Pelt, the offensive coordinator, when he met the media, said it is their intention to have Drake play. I'm just not convinced he's going to play the whole game, because I do think they also want to get a look at that 6th-round draft choice, Joe Milton, who obviously has a 6'5" frame. He's 244 pounds, and he's got a rocket arm.
Yeah, I did him coming out.
I don't know that he's as accurate as Drake Maye is.
No.
But knowing that Bills fans have a chance of likely seeing him at some point on Sunday, what can you tell us about Joe Milton?
Well, any quarterback, and it was the same with Hendon Hooker, any quarterback that comes out of the Josh Heupel offense at Tennessee runs one of the purest versions of the air raid offense and the passing game that there is. So that means that there's an emphasis on no huddle, fast tempo, widespread formations, pure progression reads, where a quarterback's not really taught to understand the subtleties and nuances of defenses and coverages. A high percentage of those throws are predetermined. So, but then when you watch Milton, you see this arm that just looks like it's a cannon as opposed to an arm, but he's just not very accurate. And that's, and again, as we know with Josh, a lot of people thought when he came out, and you guys probably felt the same way because no one knew that, God, this guy wasn't super accurate at Wyoming. What's going to happen when he gets to the NFL? And boy, have things changed. So now people think that, hey, maybe a guy can turn out to become more accurate. But, Milton was a guy that had to be introduced and learn NFL passing concepts, progressions. He had to learn defensive fronts, coverages, structures that he'd probably never seen before. So, for him, he's a real prospect in the truest sense of the word prospect.
Yeah, and it comes back to the philosophy and how important Drake Maye is, and you got to find out what you're going to find out about your backup and them going forward. Yeah. But this is a team, Christian Gonzalez might be out with concussion. Both corners might be out. So you're undermanned. You got and it's a no-win situation. You need to lose the game in order to win the first pick of the draft, and you don't want to win even if it does mean seeing some young players play good.
Yeah.
So the Patriots are in a quandary.
Let me ask you guys this, just as a general point. Steve, you've been around the game a really long time. Brownie, you're obviously right in the game. When you have a young quarterback like that, their O-line's not very good, and they don't have skill position players. Where would you start? Like, this is not a one-year deal. They're not all of a sudden going to have everything next year. Where would you start?
You got to, Greg, you always start with the big guys.
Up front, yeah.
You got to start with the big guys because they're more rare.
Yeah, they're harder to find.
They're more rare. You got good guys big, huge guys who can really play professional football, who are smart enough, committed enough, and trained well enough, are hard to find. They're more rare. Start there because athletes, not to be disrespectful, athletes are a dime a dozen. Every college team's full of guys that can run and jump and throw and catch, but you can't find quality big guys. So
there's not 150 Deion Dawkins just sitting out there.
That's right.
I'm being honest.
Exactly
I'm not saying
right.
that as a
You're
joke.
right.
I'm saying, but yeah.
Yeah, the Wilford, the Vince Wilforks and the Ted Washingtons and the Aaron Donalds are rare.
Right.
Even in the league. So you're just looking for guys who can actually play and compete. So that's where you start. You got to start up front.
Yeah.
And it's funny you say that. It reminded me of a conversation I had with John Gruden when I did the book with Ron Jaworski, and I got to talk to Gruden, who I know, and talk to him for a long time. Because once you start talking to Gruden about football, you could put the phone down, walk away for 3 hours, come back, and he's still talking. But he said that you do not have a pass game unless you can protect. And the bottom line is you can get all these cool skill guys on the perimeter. And by the way, Steve, you're 100% right, because wide receivers are the most drafted position in the draft every single year. There's a lot of guys, even at smaller schools, that we don't even know about that can run 4.4s and can go and catch a football. But, if you can't protect your quarterback, you got nothing.
Yeah. Right.
Let's kind of discuss the potential playoff opponents for Buffalo. Could be Denver.
Okay.
Could be Miami, could be Cincinnati, although they need a lot to happen for that to come to fruition. Denver we have not seen much of, here in the East, and lead the league in sacks with 58. They've got a good defense. We know that. And Bo Nix looks like he's established himself as the franchise quarterback for them going forward. But how equipped is that offense to go toe-to-toe with a team like Buffalo offensively?
Well, I'll say this. The one area in which Denver has not done as well as I know Sean Payton would like is they've not been consistent running the football. Yeah. And that's been a very week-to-week thing. I think Javonte Williams, a player I really like coming out of North Carolina, for whatever reason, it's not turned out for him in Denver. And I thought maybe this would be the year, with Bo Nix there. And by the way, I got to know Bo Nix a bit during the draft process. He is a super impressive kid. And he actually called the protections at Oregon, and that's very, very rare. And I'm sure that's one reason why Sean Payton really wanted this kid. He traded up for him. He was the guy he targeted because this kid is super intelligent, has played a ton of college football. As I said, called the protections, so he understood all that. He actually showed this year in the league a stronger arm than I personally thought he showed on tape in college. Now, again, in college, in that system, you didn't see a lot of necessarily drive throws. And I know people respond to the throw he made last week, that long ball to Mims. That's not what I mean by a strong arm. And if you're talking to Jim Kelly, he would tell you strong arms come from throwing a deep dig off your back foot at 24 yards, between a window throw between defenders. That's arm strength. And Nix has shown the ability to do that all season long. And I think he's played at a really, pretty high level, given that he's a rookie quarterback. But defensively, they're an interesting team, Brownie. I mean, they've got a lot of good players that probably people in Buffalo are not familiar with. And they've got a lot of players on their front that can win one-on-one, to rush the quarterback. So they do a really good job. And Vance Joseph's been a coordinator in this league for a long time. You guys, I'm sure, know him well. They do such a good job both schematically, tactically, and they create one-on-ones as well. And they have guys who can win one-on-one. Zach Allen is a really, really good defensive tackle. Those two edge guys, Cooper and Benito, they can win one-on-one on the perimeter. And we know about Patrick Surtain on the back end. And they've got two safeties who I think, one you'll know from Miami, Brandon Jones, who was very good in Miami, and the other PJ Locke. Those are two really good safety. In some ways, they're like Poyer and Hyde in that they might not have this national recognition that, people immediately say, oh boy, those are the best safeties, but they're just really good football players, just like Poyer and Hyde were for years in Buffalo.
So you got this matchup this week with the Chiefs, and they're playing Carson Wentz. I mean, how do you think this is going to go? Certainly, I told Brownie and our listeners, I think the Broncos have got a huge chip on their shoulder from the blocked field goal game early in the year.
Yeah, and I think because Wentz has always shown a propensity to get sacked a lot, who knows? I mean, the watching the Chiefs' offense with Mahomes has been kind of a really intriguing thing this year because it hasn't looked anything like in the past. But Wentz has always gotten sacked a lot. They could end up with 6, 7 sacks in this game. But they're a good defense. They're tough to play against. We know they have the shutdown corner that if they feel that they want to match him up to someone, they'll do that. Who knows if they play the Bills, whether they'll feel that way about Cooper. We don't know that. But that's a very, very good defense. So look, you get to the playoffs, teams are pretty good, and now
right.
Do teams have some weaknesses? Sure, that's normally the case. But, when everybody obviously talks about Cincinnati, who needs a lot of help, they can't get in unless the Dolphins lose and the Broncos lose, right?
Correct.
Is that what it is?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Because obviously the way Joe Burrow's playing, he's playing at a really, really high level.
Yeah.
The game looks easy to Joe Burrow right now.
Let's look at Miami, though. They just need Denver to lose, and they need to win, although that seems a little precarious right now with Tyler Huntley slated to start for a second straight week. Mike McDaniel saying today it doesn't look like Tua is going to be able to go with the hip injury. So it's back to Huntley, and those are two very different quarterbacks skill set-wise. So the last couple of weeks, McDaniel has had to essentially make 2 game plans, one for each quarterback, arguably. But the thing about Miami, Greg, that's impressed me is the job Anthony Weaver has done since the Bills last saw them in Week 9. They're top 10 across the board defensively now. And I know they haven't been playing some great teams of late, but what Weaver has been able to do with that defensive unit, down people, didn't have Bradley Chubb all season, lost Jalen Phillips, Chop Robinson's coming on for him. Have they kind of transformed themselves defensively into a more consistent unit? It certainly seems that way.
Yeah, they've played really well defensively. And Anthony Weaver, it's funny, I work with a guy who played, a very good friend of mine here at NFL Films named Darryl Campbell, who played with Anthony Weaver at Notre Dame. So, he knows Anthony obviously really, really well. But no, they've played really well. A couple of guys who played really well that a lot of people I don't think know about are Zach Seiler, who's again, I mentioned Zach Allen with Denver. Seiler's along those lines. He's a really good defensive tackle. Even Benito Jones, they've gotten really good snaps from him inside. You guys obviously know Poyer. Poyer and Holland's a very good safety tandem. So this defense has played well. They probably don't have a true pass rusher, although Chop Robinson has certainly come on in the second half of the season and showed a lot of the skills that showed up on, when I evaluated him coming out of Penn State. And I just have to tell you, I thought Huntley last week, I thought that was the best I've seen him play. I mean, he actually played. I don't know if you got a chance to see it. I thought he played with a sense of rhythm, timing. He looked like a timing player, which, quite frankly, he has rarely ever looked like in the opportunity he's gotten in the league, which is why he's never really made it and has been with so many teams. But I thought last week was the best game he ever played.
And I'll say this too. I think Mike McDaniel can take a lot of credit for that. The way he constructs a game plan around his quarterback. He does it masterfully with Tua. And I think Huntley, the longer he plays, I think the better he'll get with Mike McDaniel, because I think that's what McDaniel does really well.
I agree with you. And they have so much speed, and it always seems to me when I watch Miami, even with Tua, that the whole way they want to play is just to get guys in space that can run. Like sometimes I feel like they have to just go back to what Mike did when he was with the 49ers, which is just line up and, run the ball and try to have some physicality. And sometimes I feel like that's not the way they play, and maybe hey, again, he knows his players better than I do. He's dealing with an offensive center in Brewer who's probably 260 pounds. So maybe, he feels like he can't play that way with this particular group. He doesn't have a great O-line. Eichenberg plays guard. He's not really that guy. He's probably not a starting guard in the league, but, that's what you have. So maybe he plays a certain way for reasons that we don't necessarily know. But everything to me about them is get these guys in space. I mean, his whole offense seems to be, not his whole offense, but much of it is about getting Achane in space.
Yeah.
And he is really dynamic.
And then Cincinnati, you touched on their offense already. They're the number one passing offense in football, partly because they have trouble running the ball with any measure of consistency, and also because they're usually behind in games because their defense has trouble stopping anybody. What would you say is the biggest deficiency to the Bengals defense that makes this version of the Bengals very, very different and not nearly as good as the ones that were contending for AFC titles just a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I think their back end has been really a problem this season. Hendrickson's a really good pass rusher coming from the right side of the defense. Beside him, they probably do not have another pass rusher. They lost Logan Wilson. He's been out. I don't know. I forget when he got hurt, but he's done for the year. Good linebacker. But their back end at the corner position, even at the safety position, it's been problematic. They lost Hill early in the season, the kid from Michigan who made the transition from safety to corner, and he looked like he was going to become a very good corner. And then I think I thought it was an ACL, but I could be wrong, but he's out for the year. Their back end, Brownie's been a real problem. And that's killed them. Because you can try to do, Lou Anarumo's been around, this is not his first rodeo. And I'm sure some people say, oh, you got to get rid of him, the whole deal. Hey, when you can't cover in this league, it's really hard to play. And they have not covered well. And it's just been too hard. I heard Troy Aikman talking about Burrow the other night. Cincinnati wasn't playing, but, and he made the point, which he can make, he as a Hall of Fame quarterback, and Steve, you can appreciate this as well. He kind of made the point that when you have to score 35 points every game just to compete, not even to win, just to compete, that is really hard to do for a quarterback. And Burrow's been doing that literally every week.
Yeah, and I'll say this. Are they this team that, and I've been downplaying the Bengals, everybody's afraid that the Bengals are going to get in and they're going to go on this tear and all that. They're an 8-8 team. I mean, they are, and it's the old Bill Parcells saying, they are what their record says they are. They're a middle-of-the-road team. And as good as Joe Burrow has played, all you need is one or two plays against them, and you beat them, which has been shown to be teams have done. The last four teams.
But I will say this: I think
go ahead.
They've won either 3 or 4 in a row. Offensively, they're playing at a really, really high level, and they've got really good people, particularly on the outside. I think their O-line is still, just okay. The question is, can you just keep outscoring people? That becomes the question. When you get to the playoffs, can you just keep doing that? I guess, first of all, we don't even know if they're going to make it because they need those other two things to happen. But their offense is really good. It's just their defense is really problematic. They really struggle on the back end.
Their last 4 wins, they were against Cowboys by 7, then the Titans by 10.
Right.
Then they beat the Browns, and then they beat the Broncos, which was probably a pretty good win for them in Cincinnati.
Yeah. So, right. But so I mean, obviously because of Burrow, and I don't think anybody would argue that Burrow is not a great player. So that's what scares people, the way he's played right now. I mean, the last 8 games, he's thrown for 250 plus and 3 or more touchdowns in 8 consecutive games. They score points, they move the ball. He's an unflappable player. But yeah, their defense is no one would argue that either. Their defense is a real problem.
Yeah. Right. And then finally, I know you probably do this a little bit looking back on the season that was. We've seen the run game come back into focus and be a bigger part of NFL offenses this season.
Oh, yeah.
You look at the last 5 years and you look at the top 30 players in total yards from scrimmage, like 25 of them were wide receivers. And this year, about 12 of them are running backs. They're really a larger factor than we've seen in recent years. Is this purely because of all the light boxes we see now and nickel defense being primary, base defense for teams that we're seeing this cyclical shift here?
I would answer that in multiple ways. Number one, I think that pass protection and that could well be a function of changes in the collective bargaining agreement and teams not being able to practice as much. I think pass protection, which really requires cohesion more than anything else, has not been as good. And obviously, if you can't protect, you don't have a passing game. So I think that's one reason. I think another reason is the way defenses play on the back end. There's a lot more too high safety structures, which take away certain route concepts that were prevalent in the league for years. The seam routes, they take away those routes. And I think that what you said, Brownie, is also true. I think there's a lot of linebackers who were smaller. I mean, look at the Bills. I think Bernard's a really, really good player. I don't think anybody would dispute that. But what is he, 225, 228?
Sure.
There's a lot more linebackers like that coming in the league because that's what college football is giving the NFL. And I think that a lot of these playoff teams, a good number of them, have run games that are in, sort of the top 10 in the league. And this year, there's going to be 5 or 6 backs with 300 plus carries. Last year, there were no backs with 300 plus carries. So clearly, teams believe that running the football is more a foundation of what you need to do offensively than in recent years. We'll see if that trend continues going forward. The league is cyclical, as you guys know, so things change over time. But yeah, there's no question that teams are lining up and believing that the run game is the starting point of their offense more so than we've seen in recent years.
Stuff, Greg. It's always great talking with you.
Thanks, guys. Well, next week we'll have a playoff game to talk about.
Yeah,
Let's go.
we'll be ready. We'll see you then.
All right. Thanks, guys.